Hello everybody, wherever you are in the world, good morning, good afternoon and good evening. Welcome to BIMREC webinar 15.0. Discover how to manage asset information using BIM Level 2. During today's webinar, you will learn about the key requirements of PAS1192 Part 3, the part of the definition of BIM Level 2 that focuses on asset management. You'll discover how asset owners / operators identify the information they need asset contractors to provide. You'll understand how asset information is approved and authorized under Level 2. You'll also learn how existing enterprise systems support the asset information model. Today's BIMREC webinar 15.0 is going to benefit you by helping you discover information management standard from the lead technical author of PAS1192 Part 3. It will help you see how asset information fits with project information and how managing asset information can improve the efficiency and effectiveness of asset management, whether your organization is an asset owner, asset operator or asset contractor. This webinar will help you understand what steps you need to take to implement this aspect of BIM Level 2. Today's session should last between 45 to 60 minutes long. I will be hosting along with David. As always, we do have a ton to get through, so we're going to move quickly and have a Q&A session towards the end of today's webinar. For everyone live on today's session, at the very end of this webinar, once I've closed down the Q&A session and closed down the session completely, there will be a pop-up window which will appear. This pop-up window will have a link to the slides from today's presentation with David. If you would like the recording of today's session, a full list of the questions within the survey, my contact details for any recruitment inquiries, etc., please type your name and details in the chat box to the right-hand side. The BIMREC webinar series is an open invitation series event. We have new people attend each session. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Barie Hasib. I am the Managing Director of BIMREC. BIMREC are an essential recruitment partner for individuals and organisations really looking to win with BIM. We're devoted to helping our candidates, clients and the industry overcome any obstacles throughout your entire BIM journey. I'd like to take this opportunity to say a quick thank you for those of you who have attended numerous webinars throughout the BIMREC webinar series. It's great to receive your feedback and know you're taking away some great content. For those of you new to our series of BIM webinars, we're often asked why BIMREC put together this series of educational workshops. Well, while surveying our candidates, clients and the market, we discovered our industry still has a long way to go with regards to BIM. So we thought, what better way to help educate and bring BIM leaders directly to your desk. As you guys know, BIM is a journey. Some companies and individuals have had real great success, whilst for others it's been a steep learning curve, or for others still, they've yet to start out on this good adventure, this awesome journey. BIMREC's goal, whatever level you're currently at, is to simply help you win with BIM and help ensure our candidates, clients and the marketplace have access to world-class leaders who are experts in their fields within BIM. I'm very proud and privileged to announce we have David Church with us today. As mentioned earlier, David is the lead author of PAS1192 Part 3. David is presenting on how discover how to manage asset information using BIM Level 2. With that said, I would now like to pass you over to David Church. David, you people now see your screen. Fantastic.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much for that, Barie, and hello everybody, and welcome to this webinar on managing asset information using BIM Level 2. As Barie mentioned, I was the lead author of the UK document which has defined this aspect of the BIM Level 2 standard, and as I'm sure many of you will be aware, either from having attended previous of these webinars or from just generally being aware of what's going on in the UK, then BIM Level 2 is what the UK government is specifying for its centrally procured projects and how those, and when those turn into assets, their asset management from 2016. And clearly managing asset information once a project becomes an operational asset is a key part of the lifecycle BIM journey. The guiding document within that Level 2 standard is this PAS1192 Part 3, and what I'll be doing today is taking you through a number of topics drawn from that standard. Clearly in 40 minutes or so I'm not going to be able to cover the full content of the PAS. So what I've done is picked out 4 key areas, and even so I'm going to really only be able to scratch the surface of these, I'm afraid, but if you do need more information then I'd be very happy to help you with that after this session in whatever way. So the key topics I'd like to cover are just to understand what the requirements of this publicly available specification are. That's number 1. Number 2, to understand a little bit more about how asset owners and operators can identify the information that they need to run the asset for the benefit of their business. Number 3, to explore how asset information is approved and authorized. And number 4, to consider how existing systems can play their part in supporting the asset information model. The PAS itself, if you haven't already got a copy of it, is a free download from the British Standards Institute, the organisation that has actually published the PAS. And if you go to the BSI online shop, then once you register, which doesn't cost anything, it's just really registering your email address and so forth, then you can download the PDF of the PAS. And if you haven't done it, then I thoroughly recommend that you do, of course. So without any more ado, let me move on to the first of my topics this afternoon, and that is to think about the key requirements of this standard in setting out what is needed to be done to help manage asset information during the asset lifecycle in accordance with and in compliance with this level of BIM called BIM Level 2. And the first requirement, which is up on the screen now, is perhaps the precursor of everything else. This is what drives all the other activities around asset information management, and the requirement is that asset owners, and here we also mean the operators, depending upon ownership and concessions and those sorts of things, have to establish an information management process. So there needs to be a structured and systematic approach to asset information, and clearly that is something which is needed over the whole operating life cycle of the asset. There are 3 particular important features of this information management process which I'll talk about right now, but we'll come back to many of the other features of the information management process during the rest of this webinar. Firstly, what we mean by asset is a very broad definition. The definition is only to the extent that an asset is something that adds value to an organization. Clearly in the context of BIM we mean built assets, so buildings, infrastructure, but the scale and the extent in the way that an owner or operator defines their asset is entirely up to them. So if you are an asset owner, then you might decide that you want each of your buildings to be considered as a separate asset and for them each to have their own information model. Or it may be you want to drill down further and make each space in your building a separate asset. Each room, each classroom, each ward or treatment room if you're a hospital, each classroom if you're a school, each office area if you're an office organisation. You could go down to that level. You could go even further and say that an asset is a piece of equipment which belongs in a room or in a space. within a building, or clearly as well a piece of infrastructure. You can also go the other way. You can say that your asset is bigger than a single building, and it might be the whole of a campus or an estate. You can go even further than that, and if you own multi-properties or large networks of infrastructure that cover regions of countries or whole countries, then you might consider that all of that is your asset. It doesn't matter as far as this particular standard is concerned. The requirements of this standard will work at the small scale and at the large scale, and it's just what is most appropriate for you. The second feature is that this information management process doesn't follow a sequential sequence of activities as you would expect to find in projects, where you have a very clearly defined start, duration and end. The life cycle of an asset is much more open-ended than that. Things happen at various times. Different activities are required either on a planned basis or sometimes are needed to be reactive on an unplanned basis. So every time something happens that affects the asset, then information will need to be generated to record that and to update the information about the asset, and therefore this information management process has to come into operation each time one of those particular activities takes place. Again, we can't define what those activities are and exactly which sequence they will occur in. That will depend on the way the world works and the way the asset life cycle runs into the future. But the process as a whole should be capable of dealing with activities on an ad hoc basis as well as on a very closely planned basis. The third feature I just wanted to cover now is the issue of timing, time scale. Assets have a long life expectancy by and large, and so the information management process is something that is going to have to be operating for the life of that asset. So this could be decades or even longer. So clearly it's very difficult to look ahead and see what is going to be necessary in that many years into the future. But the process therefore has to be flexible, not only in terms of what it delivers and what it contains, what information it contains, but also in terms of the people involved, because people are going to turn over, are going to change, so that also has to be planned very carefully. So the information management process at a very high level looks something like this diagram that hopefully you can see on your screen now. And what I hope you can see from this is that from the top, asset information management is driven very strictly from a strategy and plan to manage assets in a controlled and systematic way. And that is a series of activities that have been standardized under the International Standards Organization. So there is an ISO standard 55000 which defines what an asset management standard should be. So that standard drives what we have done in this particular PAS1192 Part 3 in relation to asset information management. From the asset strategy and plan, that then drives a set of requirements for information. These are defined at two levels, which we'll come on to say a little bit more about on the next screen. But we have first the organizational information requirements, and secondly some asset information requirements, and I'll explain the difference between those. And those information requirements are setting out what is needed to be delivered by the asset management contractors, the various people working on the asset as part of their contracted tasks. The information that they provide back to the asset owner or operator ends up in this thing that we're calling the asset information model. And that is the repository of information from which the organization can analyze and assess the performance of its assets to make sure that they are supporting its business activities in the way that it expects. And what you can see at the bottom of the screen, but faded out, is a series of process boxes which are defining the project process. And if you've been familiar with BIM at a project level, then I expect you'll recognize the terms that have been used in those boxes. On the left, the plain language questions, which define the high-level stakeholder requirements for information at a project whenever a project is underway. Those lead into the employer's information requirements, which are the contractual needs for information that the designers and constructors have to provide back to the client, and that information is then all collected into a project information model. And you can see how there is an interplay between information that is needed at an asset level. The AIR, the box in the middle of the screen, does actually have a place in helping define what information is needed when a project is started, because that will define what the facilities and asset teams need by way of operational information from the project to help them run the asset when it is handed back to them and when the project is completed. And therefore, the information that is collected in the project information model is one of the avenues by which information finds its way into an asset information model as well for use in the long-term operation of the asset. So let's just think a little bit more about some of those key requirements that I mentioned as I was talking through that diagram. The first thing I talked about was the organizational information requirements, and those are high-level information requirements that are drawn from whatever it is that the corporate or organizational strategy says is needed in relation to an asset, and also what the individual stakeholders need to help them do their jobs in relation to the asset. But those sorts of high-level requirements are unlikely to be the kind of statement that could be cleanly and straight away put into a contract where an asset management contractor can get a clear and clearly defined statement of what it is they need to provide by way of information as part of their work. So there's going to have to be some translation of those high-level requirements into contractual requirements, and those are the statements that form the asset information requirements. And this is where the person who is actually in charge of this process, maybe they call themselves the asset information manager, I'm not sure, but they need to first of all find out from their stakeholders within the organization what information they need, and then they need to sit down and rewrite those high-level statements into specification statements that can actually go into individual contracts. The contractors are on the receiving end of these information requirements, and they get the contracts which define the work that they're being asked to do and which they will have priced. So they then have an obligation to provide that information back to the asset owner or operator, and that is done through a series of information exchanges. We've tried to use as much of the same principles and language that people are getting used to in project BIM in this way of defining asset BIM. So information exchanges are there as part of the contractual mechanism to move information backwards and forwards between individual contractors and the asset owner and operator. The last requirement that I've got on this screen, and after this I'm going to move on to my second topic, is that the asset information model itself needs to be established, first of all, but then once it's established, it needs to be operated. And as time goes past and as different activities are carried out on the asset, then information will be provided which will populate that asset information model. So over time it will become richer and richer. The purpose of the information model is to be a repository for all the information regarding the asset, but it's there so that it can then be analysed and processed so that the organisation itself can make decisions, can assess the performance of its assets or whatever else it is needing to do at a strategic level to make sure that the assets are playing their proper role in helping the business and helping the organisation deliver its key goals and objectives. And part of that asset information collection and storage is that there needs to be validation and verification, and we'll come on to say a little bit more about that later on as well. So let's now think about how information needs have to be identified. And I suppose at one level this could be thought of as being very straightforward and very simple. I mentioned the person who is in charge, who is running this information management process. Well, their first task would be to identify the stakeholders that are inside and maybe sometimes even outside of their organisation, and then sit down with them and actually understand what information they need regarding the assets to help them do their job. Now, every owner or operator will have its own set of stakeholders, but there's probably likely to be a finance department or an accounts department who are interested in the running costs or the money aspects of assets. There might well be operations teams who are interested in the way that the asset supports the organization's true business. If it's a manufacturer, then they want to make sure that the factory, the warehouse, and every other built asset that the organization uses are actually contributing value to the operation, that they're providing the right environment for production lines or for storage of stock or raw materials or whatever. It may be that the owner-operator is public-facing and has end users who may be customers or may just be members of the general public. So they will also have a stake in understanding how the assets are contributing to their interaction with the organisation. So shoppers, for example, you may not necessarily want to be sitting down and speaking with everyone who comes into a supermarket, but maybe some representative sample to find out what their needs for information are. There might be such simple things about times of opening or levels of lighting, or indeed they might be interested in things like energy efficiency of buildings, as is required in the European Commission at the moment. Finally, there might be stakeholders like regulators who are there to keep an eye on the organisation, particularly if it's in delivering public services. So there might be a regulator with standards about the usage or the utilization of the asset to make sure that there isn't overcrowding, or indeed to make sure that if the asset is publicly funded, that it's actually delivering value for money. So all sorts of stakeholders which would need to be interacted with on a one-by-one basis perhaps, but maybe even in groups as well. The important thing here though is that the this process of understanding what people need has to focus on what they really need. It's not just an opportunity to deliver a great big long wish list. Wouldn't it be nice if I had this information and that information and the other information? That won't really help. It's probably, as well to remind anybody who's involved in this, that of course collecting information is not a free activity. It costs money, it takes time, it requires resources. So the information that is required actually has to have a purpose in order for it to be valuable. And then the identifying information needs drills down, turning these information requirements at high level into the supplier-specific clauses and statements that I was talking about a few moments ago. Now, it may be that if you're in that position of trying to understand what it is that your stakeholders want, that they haven't been asked these questions before, and maybe you haven't been asking them before. So do recognize that this takes time. It probably requires some facilitation. It may even be helpful to have some external assistance and expertise, particularly to bring some independence to the process of exploring what information is necessary. So don't think you have to climb this particular mountain all on your own. There is a help available to you. And moving on with the topic of identifying information needs, once those information needs have been identified, then it's the turn of the supply chain to actually deliver that information back to the client and or the owner and operator. And what you can see on the screen in the diagram is an extract from a figure from the PAS, which is part of the information management process. What you can see on the left-hand side of that image is the asset information requirements in little groups, perhaps one group per contract or per contractor, feeding into different types of contracts that are taking place in the lifetime of the asset. The top line immediately launches into employers' line where the asset information requirement is triggering a major project, which is going to be handled in more detail using that other standard PAS1192 Part 2, which is the capital delivery and project information management. But if you're not going down that route, you might have maintenance contractors, surveyors, or indeed people doing regulatory inspections from time to time, outsourced or to an in-house works team. But there is still in effect a contract to be done and information to be collected as a result of that work. The green circles are the information exchanges which take place with those contractors and the information management data environment, which we'll come on a bit more about in a minute. And so that information is then handed across into the start of the common data environment, work in progress. You can see the blue boxes on the right-hand side of that diagram. It may be that some of these contracts require multiple information exchanges because they last for quite some time. It may be that some of these activities are very short and simple tasks, and the information exchange is for something that happens at the end of the task to actually close it out. It will again be defined according to the nature of the work that is being carried out under each of the contracts that have these asset information requirements embedded within them. Let me move on now to my third topic, which is the way that information gets authorized and validated. Now this is a figure from the PAS as well, and it is an extension of the common data environment that was originally spelled out in British Standard 1192 back in 2007 and was developed for project level 2 BIM in PAS1192 Part 2. We've developed it again slightly differently for PAS1192 Part 3, so it makes more sense from an asset point of view, but let me just talk you through the key features of it. On the left-hand side, we have the blue squares of work in progress. These are areas in the common data environment where individual contractors and works teams can collect and assimilate their own information as they're going through their contract. They then go through an approval process so that they check that what they've collected, the information they've collected, aligns with what they were asked for, and they then go through that gate, which is numbered 6, approve their information and upload it to the shared part of the common data environment. In the shared area, it is now the turn of the owner or operator to look at the information that has been supplied from that particular contractor, to look at it against the information requirements that were put into that contract, and to then check whether, from an owner-operator point of view, they are happy that they've got all of the information that they were expecting. So that is the middle yellow shared box and the dotted box to the right of it. Sometimes the information will be fine and all the details will be correct. Sometimes that information, there might be something missing or something that hasn't been provided in the way that it was meant to be, and so there will be a gap or some new information that's necessary, and so then that's returned back to the supplier for, in effect, a second go, another opportunity to complete their information, exchange it back with the owner-operator for a further verification and validation. Once that information has been verified and validated, two things happen to it. If it's all fine and everything's okay, then it gets accepted and approved, and it goes through the authorized box, and it ends up in the published part of the common data environment. That's the green box on the right-hand side. And from there, it can then be used. It's then been quality assured and checked, and it's all like it should be, and it's then part of the information repository that can be used to answer the organizational questions and the stakeholder needs that set this whole process running in the first place. Perhaps, though, the information hasn't been approved and it's been rejected. Even so, a record of that is going to be stored in the Common Data Environment Archive, so that there is this complete audit trail of all the information that has been exchanged with the contractors during the life cycle. So clearly that is going to get quite sizable over time, but it does provide audit trail and history in case there is any future disagreement or dispute. So that is the route by which information gets authorized. And what I want to go on to say now as my fourth topic is to look at that right-hand part of the diagram, partially obscured by my blue clouds now, where we talk about linked enterprise systems. So let's have a little look at what those are all about. Just backtrack a minute or two. The published part of the common data environment is the information that has been through the validation and verification process, and it is information that is suitable for use in running and operating the asset. So that actually is the asset information model from a common data environment point of view. However, it's very likely that the organization, the owner, the operator of this asset will already be collecting lots of information about that asset. They may already have a whole series of information systems which are collecting information. And it's not the intention of PAS1192 Part 3 that all of those existing systems get thrown away and reinvented or duplicated within this published part of the common data environment. So if there are existing systems that are working perfectly happily, then there's no reason why they can't carry on being used. And that's where there are these links to and fro from existing enterprise systems which are linked from the published area of the common data environment or the asset information model. And that is really a pragmatic approach to how many organizations are going to be implementing this standard over the coming years. It makes the most sense not to force everybody to throw away all of the good work that they've been doing so far. Now clearly it's outside the scope of the PAS to list out or even categorize all of the possible existing systems that any organization might have. So all I've done here is to give some examples, and as you've seen on the previous slide, there are some examples in the diagrams in the PAS, but here are some more examples as well. And this is also particularly the area where I want to show how other stakeholders get engaged in this asset information management process. So for example, if the organization is a big retail chain, then maybe they own or lease lots of stores, so their legal department may well have a database of all the different shops that they occupy and the ownership or leasing terms under which they occupy them. No point in reinventing all of that within the asset information model. It can just be linked in. Perhaps the organization is a government department with lots of offices around the country. They might have a central CAFM system, computer-aided facilities management system, which records energy consumption on a building-by-building basis, records when they've had works done, maintenance activities and so forth, and perhaps that's all controlled by their facilities management department. Again, that's not a system that has to be thrown away. It can be incorporated into the asset management model. Perhaps the organization is a hotel chain and they use the room key entry system to keep tabs on how full their hotels are or how well used or how often used some of the rooms are. So maybe they can think about their redecoration processes rather more intelligently than just redecorating everything every 5 years, but only redecorating the rooms that get used most frequently to be more efficient in the way they spend their money. So that might be a system that is controlled by their security team or may even be linked through to their finance department. And my last example could perhaps be a local where maybe there are a whole series of retaining walls alongside roads and the local authority has got some strain gauges on those to make sure that they're not moving and therefore the road users aren't in danger from the collapse of those retaining walls. Now those records might well be controlled by the highways department within that authority, and again, no reason for that system to be ditched and superseded by whatever's coming along from the asset information model. I think perhaps hopefully you're getting the message that the asset information model, rather than being a single standalone all singing all dancing system, is more likely to be a collection of existing systems, albeit operating to some standards which they might not have been operating to in the past. And that is a really important point. Wherever data and information is stored in external systems, then clearly it has to abide by and comply with the same checks and approvals as information that's coming in through the common data environment process that I was showing you earlier. It may be that some of these systems are automated. So actually, measurement of energy consumption may just be through meters that have been installed and some those links into automated systems rather than human data input. Now, one would hope that the way those systems have been set up means that the information that's delivered does comply with the original information requirements. So the fact that the information still passes through the WIP, work in progress, and the shared areas where it's assembled and then checked is actually almost an instantaneous non-stopping activity. Actually, the information really just ends up immediately into the published area and probably passed on back into the CAFM system so that it is recorded in the appropriate place. The last thing I want to say about asset information, the asset information model, is the steps that need to be taken to make sure that the model, which is the sort of information version of the asset, is in agreement with or in alignment with the actual physical asset. Clearly, as time moves on and as the asset gets operated and used, then its state is going to change. Things may break down, things may need replacing. That is almost a continuous feed of information that's coming from the asset into the asset information model. It's up to the organization that's running this process whether they really need their information model to be in continuous alignment with the physical state of the asset, because that might be a very expensive solution. So real-time measurement, lots of automated sensing and processing. It may be that the most cost-effective way of aligning the model and the asset is actually to do a periodic update, maybe every few weeks or every couple of months. Again, that will depend on the nature of the owner's business, how crucial and critical that asset is to particular parts of their organizational operation. So again, the PAS allows for either of those routes to be put in place depending upon what the organization thinks is best for them. So really now just moving on to a summary of the key points that I've been touching on this afternoon. And clearly, as I said at the beginning, in the time available, it's not been possible to go through the PAS or indeed asset information management in complete detail. So it may be that you've got further questions to be answered, and very happy to take those after this slide. But some key points to take away, I hope. The asset information management, which is what happens once a built asset gets into operation, is still a key part of this definition of what is BIM Level 2, what is BIM for the UK government client, and by extension lots of other client organisations as well. I hope we've understood the importance of defining and identifying the information requirements. That is some work that really has to be done right up front. It can't be short-circuited or hurried, because if this is not done properly, then the rest of the process is not going to be effective. but it may be that the people engaged in those information requirements need to be taken along with you. They need to be encouraged to give their view as to what information is needed, because maybe they haven't been asked those questions before. The asset management supply chain also has to behave slightly differently. They've got some different things to do, so not just the everyday work that they might have been used to doing up till now, but this time they've also got to provide information back to the owner or operator, in effect as proof that they've been doing the right activities. Maybe they need to be engaged and have it explained to them what their new role is in this process. And of course, the long-term management of the information process is important, not just in terms of the systems that are used to house the information. Will they still be usable in 10 or 15 years' time? Actually, the people that are operating the process needs to be planned that there's going to be succession and turnover in the individuals involved in asset information management. I think my closing summary point is a plea to anyone who is embarking on this to just, rather than jumping straight in and rolling your sleeves up and getting your hands dirty, first of all, take a step back. Recognize that information management is a process that should be adding value to your organization by making the assets more effective in the way that they support the business. So therefore, it is something that you should be setting out to do correctly, rather than jumping in, having a go, and then spending your time correcting what might be an imperfect or hurriedly put together system. So on that note, I'd like to ask for some questions, and Barie, I think you've got some to
I certainly have.
be going on with.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, first off, David, thanks for sharing such an important part of BIM Level 2. It's great for you to get the content out, so thank you ever so much. Jumping straight into the questions. Is there an audit guide for taking project information model to asset information model, as we are trying to implement BIM standards around our new asset information system, Concerto? Just find COBie too much wasted information. We want a more specified, useful data-filled asset model.
Oh, right. Okay, that's a big question to start with. Right. Well, actually, I suppose, strictly speaking, no, there isn't a guide. Unfortunately, the PAS is all we have at the moment.
Sure.
And that is just a set of requirements. So the PAS sets out what any organization would need to achieve in order to comply with BIM Level 2, but it won't necessarily tell them the ins and outs of how to do it.
Right.
And I suppose, to be fair, because the implementation of BIM Level 2 is still not quite with us,
Sure.
then it may be that particular individuals and organizations haven't really quite woken up to what this really means for them.
Yeah.
Yes, COBie is sort of the information exchange standard, and of course that's defined through BS1192 Part 4. But I think my underlying response to this question would be the information that is needed to go into an asset information system has to be driven by the business.
Sure.
It has to be driven by the stakeholders and what they really want to help them do their part of the organization's work more effectively and to do their jobs. So it's driven, if you like, from that top-down bit, rather than necessarily complying with whatever COBie happens to say. So hopefully, that would be my approach to that.
Fantastic, thank you. Does the word asset embrace the term facility, e.g. is AM also FM?
Oh yes, absolutely, yes. Yeah, sorry, I've rather focused entirely on using the word asset this afternoon, today. Yes, facilities, assets, to us they're all the same, to the PAS they're all the same. There was a discussion when we were writing the PAS as to which word we ought to use. We started off using facility and or asset all the way through the text, and that got very sort of clumsy, and so in the end we decided that we ought to just plump for one term, and we perhaps because the asset management standard in ISO was being developed at the same time, then it made sense to use the word asset. Absolutely, it includes facilities, anything to do with the built environment, basically buildings, infrastructure, whatever, it's all included.
If they only had if that foresight was there when they come up with the term BIM, I'm sure they would change the building part of it.
That's an entirely different conversation. all day if we get into that topic.
Exactly. I'm a BIM manager in a large-scale architectural firm, and our BIM projects usually start from the very beginning of a project lifecycle. My question is, how can I structure the BIM information during the start with consideration to the asset management?
Right, okay. So an architectural BIM manager. Okay, so the key part here is that in the very early stages of a project process, and if I can momentarily use sort of UK language and talk about the RIBA and the plan of work stages, stages 1 and 2, when the brief and the concepts are being defined for what this project is going to turn out to be, then it's crucial that the facilities managers or asset managers are engaged in those conversations, because they are the people who will know what information they require to operate the asset when they eventually get ownership of it at the end of the project. And so clearly they're the people who have to be asked right at the beginning. And hopefully that, to me it's that simple. It might not be that easy if you've already got a project that's underway and you haven't gone through that process to start with, because you might be playing catch up. And once the asset managers are asked what they'd like, they might actually be giving some unexpected answers. But certainly for a new project, I would advocate always engaging with the FM and AM team, and indeed with other stakeholders from an asset point of view. So it might not just be the asset management team or the FM team, because they might not be able to represent everybody else, but they might be your gateway through into the other stakeholders within the owning organisation, the client organisation.
Thank you. How do clients determine the plain language questions they want answered?
Oh, right, okay. I mean, strictly speaking, this is a PAS level 2, PAS part 2 question, because plain language questions are about high-level project information requirements. But actually my answer is the same. Clients determine their plain language questions by asking the appropriate stakeholders. They're really long, not complicated, I suppose that's giving the wrong impression, but it was quite a painful process went through when the UK trial BIM projects were being run in some of the government departments, where they realised they had to fully understand what their procurement process was for projects and their management process was for assets. And actually what became clear was that the individuals didn't have that 360-degree view of what the internal processes were. Collectively, everybody knew a little bit of the picture, and if you put them all together, you can get the full picture. But actually that's not really good enough. And actually what they used was these trial projects was an opportunity for them to actually re-examine all of their processes. It did take them a long time, but actually probably paid huge dividends for them being able to weed out non-value adding processes and steps in their flow charts and actually really streamline their activities. So from an asset point of view, from a project point of view, actually it all starts with the stakeholders and finding out what they need, when and how and why.
Sure, okay, fantastic. Another question here with regards to digital asset management systems. What digital asset management systems are already used by asset managers, and how compatible, amendable are these with BIM standards?
Oh, right, okay. Now this is not really my area of expertise. Sure. I mean, by asset management systems, I guess we're talking about IT. Yeah. IT is something that to me is a bit of a magic box.
As we discovered yesterday, huh? Between the two of us.
Yes. I do know that some asset information system providers, in fact Concerto was mentioned earlier.
Yes, it was.
And I do believe that Concerto is now certainly selling itself as being PAS1192 Part 3 compliant.
Right, okay. Hello, David. We appear to have lost David. If those people live on today's session, if you could just type in the box a quick hello again, or I can hear you. David appears to have gone offline, so it is David's end, not this end. We shall give David a few moments to try to log back in. If you do have any questions in the meantime, please do put them in a box to the right hand side again. I shall put them to David once David returns. Oh, there you are.
Oh, right. Sorry about that. I'm back now.
That's quite okay.
I don't know where I got to. I suddenly saw a box come up on my screen saying your connection gone away.
Oh, yeah, I had that earlier. You were talking with regard to Concerto being and PAS1192 Part 3.
Yes. Well, I'm not sure what they've done to implement Part 3, but maybe they've dismembered or the PAS and sort of integrated it into their system. Hopefully they have, but as I'm not using them or communicating with them on a day-to-day basis, I can't really say. Hopefully other organizations are doing the same. But if you're a user of these systems, then my view is that you should be asking some difficult questions, some really pointed questions about how their system addresses the requirements of the PAS.
Sure.
The PAS is only written as 41 different requirements. So you could almost go through them one by one with a supplier and say, okay, how do you do this? How do you do that?
Sure.
How do you do the other? And see them change from pale to white, or see all the blood drain from their faces as they're trying to answer. No, be quite hard-nosed about it. Is my advice there.
Sure, okay, fantastic. A question's coming from Andrew. As it has taken a lot for companies to implement BIM within their organisation, do you think the UK government might delay the commencement of the BIM mandate? If so, for how long and why? This is a question I get asked actually quite a lot as well.
Yes, absolutely. It's a very good question.
Yeah.
I'm afraid I don't know the answer to it. I suspect if there is an answer to it, there is probably one person who knows it, and they're keeping it very close to their chest. Certainly I would be if I was in their shoes.
Sure.
I think, I think this should always be seen as a gradual introduction. Although, I mean, the mandate is expressed in quite hard terms that, from 2016, BIM Level 2 will be required on all projects and in relation to all assets,
sure.
Electronic information and so forth. But there's going to have to be some realistic rollout of this. The departments that have taken most active roles in the pilot project will be quicker off the mark. So, Ministry of Justice, I would hope.
Yeah.
Highways Agency, Environment Agency, and so forth. Maybe some of the other departments will be in a second wave. I think it would be very difficult for there to be any hard and fast postponement of the mandate, and it might just get rolled out softly rather than a big bang.
Sure. Interesting takeaway. Okay. Another question relating to this as well. How far advanced is level 2 in the UK, and what does the PAS mean for the rest of Europe? And are there any plans to make PAS compulsory in more countries?
Oh, right. Okay. How far advanced in the UK, again, is a difficult question to answer until we actually get...
What's your take on how many people have actually taken it up or at BIM level 2? Because I hear completely different answers, dependent on completely different industries and who I speak with.
Yes. I think I would take the view that there are some big projects that are going underway now that have been quite public about their adoption of level 2 as a standard. I'm thinking of things like Crossrail.
Yeah.
And so there are going to be many organisations and many individuals who have been working on those projects who will be, quite up to speed with the requirements of level 2.
Sure.
But I think we still have to recognise that in the overall scheme of things, that is a small minority.
Sure.
BIM level 2, of course, is only required to apply to centrally procured public projects, which is a subset of all public sector work. I've heard the value of about £4 to £6 billion worth of work a year out of an industry which is in the sort of 80 to 90 billion.
Sure.
So it's very small percentages, but it's going to be quite high profile.
Sure.
And I suppose the intention is that over the next 5 years it will sort of sift out, or it'll go out into other areas of the public sector.
Sure.
And also, actually, I do know that certain private sector organisations, I'm working on one at the moment, are applying BIM level 2 to some of their projects, and they are going on the journey because they see that it has the potential to add value for them.
Sure.
So they're doing it, and I'm guessing more and more will. But in terms of the wider application, then the only thing I can really say here is that there is an international standard which is being written at the moment.
Yeah.
I'm involved in that.
Right.
Which is taking our UK standards at a project level. So it's BS1192 and PAS1192 Part 2, and it's taking those standards and turning them into an international standard.
Right, okay.
And that's being done with sort of a number of countries around the world, of course, and I expect that will, it's still quite early days, and I don't think that'll actually hit the streets probably for a couple of years yet.
Sure.
I believe there's also a CEN committee, so a European Standards Committee being set up for BIM.
Yeah.
And that will also, I think, whether it does the same standards or whether it develops its own, I'm not quite sure. That will be much more important at a Europe level.
Sure.
For us.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Thank you. A couple more questions have come in as well. I'm conscious of time, however. Are you okay to answer a couple more questions?
Oh, yeah, sure, absolutely, no problem.
Fantastic. Questions coming from Ralph. Is the OIR really a collection of lots of stakeholder specified requirements, or is the AR a collection of lots of separate contractor requirements?
Right, if I heard that correctly, then both.
Right.
Because the OIR is requirements from stakeholders. Now, these are people or departments that may not necessarily be used to talking construction contract language. So the way that they express their requirements may make sense to them,
sure,
but they may not make sense to an asset management contractor. You might get the odd one which does,
right,
but I wouldn't, you can't guarantee that. The job of the operator's asset information manager, or whatever they're called, or going to be called, is to take all of those inputs from different stakeholders and say, these are all the the objectives of the information management process is going to answer all these questions.
Sure.
But we then need to collect bits of information, bits of data from a dozen or 20 or 30 different contractors.
Yeah.
So we then have to then sort of carve up those stakeholder requirements into some much more specific contract statements, which can then be dished out amongst the various contracts.
Sure. Right. Okay. So,
yeah.
carry on. So I think this question is going to go well with that. So is there a guidance available to write the OIRs and AIRs? And if so, what content is required to be considered?
Right, okay. There is a little bit of guidance in the back of the PAS.
Right.
But it's really just a kind of a starting point, because OIRs and AIRs are very personal to the organisation. Yeah. They have to be.
Sure.
But what we've done in the back of the PAS, there's an annex, which is Annex A, and I'm looking. Well, if I want to take notes of pages, then I'll just say pages 20 and 21.
Right.
Then there are two sections there which give some guidance on what some OIRs might look like.
Yeah.
That's on page 20. And on page 21, there's some guidance as to what some AIRs might look like.
Okay.
But that's as far as it goes in terms of guidance, I'm afraid.
Sure.
If anybody is really struggling, then clearly I'm very happy to assist after today and in whatever way is suitable.
Fantastic, thank you. One more question, again I'm conscious of time, and then after this question, David, if you'd like to jump to your slide so people can see how they can get in contact with you. However, another question is coming from Ralph. Do you have the ISO number for the project converting BS1192 to international standard?
Yes, I do. I can give you two things. I can give you the ISO number that it's going to be, and that is ISO 19650.
19650, yes?
Yep, 19650.
Yep.
And if you need a committee reference, then this is being done under the auspices of, and apologies for this because ISO is such a labyrinthine organisation, it is Technical Committee 59.
Yeah.
And then within that, it is Subcommittee 13, and then within that, it's Working Group 13.
Right, okay.
So TC 59, SC 13, WG 13. That is the group of people who are beavering away to turn UK standards into ISO standards.
Fantastic. I know you broke up earlier. A quick question is coming from David. So Annex A, page 21 of the PAS 1192, Part 3.
Yes.
I think, yeah, you
20 and 21 are the two pages for examples of organisational and asset information requirements.
Okay, David said thank you for that. Fantastic. David, how can people get in contact with you? What's the best ways? What's the best format? When are you available from and to?
Okay, right. I mean, if you wouldn't mind, I've got a slide I can just show to let people see.
Please do.
If you could hand the screen back to me.
Oh, I thought you had it.
Do I not?
I think you do, yeah. Yes.
Oh, sorry, I apologise.
That's quite okay. I thought there's my mouse going wrong again.
In that case, I do apologise. People can see on the screen that I can help. I can help in a number of ways. If you need more details about what the PAS means, if you need help to engage with either your customers as asset stakeholders or your suppliers as your supply chain, then I can help you do that. Maybe facilitating discussions and workshops and meetings. Maybe I can just hold your hand in a figurative way to make sure you spend your resources efficiently. You can get me on email, david.churcher@hitherwood.co.uk. You can get me on the phone, which is a UK mobile number, +44, and then a 0 if you need it, 7900 254 090. I'll be very happy to take questions on the content of today if you haven't had the chance to ask them this afternoon, or today rather. If you've got more detailed requirements, then drop me a line and I'll do my very best to help you out.
Fantastic.
So be good to talk to people.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. I know at times I've had a bit of a challenge getting through to you via email. So if somebody wants to contact you, can they send you a text to your mobile or something with their email address?
Absolutely.
And then, is that
yes, indeed. Yes. If the email bounces back, then send me a text and I can get in touch with you. Strangely enough, as Barie and I have been experiencing, email from me has been working fine. Email to me has occasionally been a bit of a problem. So apologies if you do have an issue there, but do text me and I'll pick it up from there.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dave. I did want to cover that point because I appreciate you've taken your time today to have this superb presentation, which I'm very thankful for. There's lots of thanks coming in on the chat box as well.
Very kind.
So no,
thank everybody for their participation.
I'm sure everybody's going to say you are more than welcome. With regards to our next event from BIMREC's side, it is in a couple of weeks on the 25th, I believe, with Arto Kivinami. I hope I've said that right, Professor Arto Kivinami. If you guys attending live here or watching this video back have any questions for me at all, would like to understand how BIMREC can help your organisation win with BIM, please send me an email to barie@bimrec.com. With that said, I'm going to wrap up today. Thank you once again, David. It's been an absolute pleasure. You've provided so much great content there, so thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you, everybody. Very happy to be able to help.
Superb. Thanks again, David. And if you stay to the end now, the slides will pop up for today's presentation with David as well. Thank you, everybody. See you speak to you in a couple of weeks. Take care. Thanks again, David, as well.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.